Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this virtual discussion of the film, Stateless. By way of explanation of what you'll be seeing later, Stateless brings to light the crises of those of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic, many of whom have been left stateless by that government's 2013 decision to take away citizenship from Haitian immigrants and their descendants. Stateless highlights universal themes of access to citizenship, migration, and systemic racism. Tonight, we'll meet the film's writer, director, and subject, as well as an arts neighbor of ours here in the city of Pittsburgh, Andres Franco. Our panelists are Michelle Stevenson, filmmaker. Michelle's award-winning work includes the acclaimed documentary American Promise, which was nominated for 3 Emmys, not too shabby, including Best Documentary. She is co-founding member of the RADA Film Group, as well as an artist and author. Michelle's work draws on her experience as an international human rights attorney, as well as her Panamanian and Haitian roots to tell humanely provocative stories in a variety of media. Rosa Iris Guidomi Alvarez is the subject and the shiro of Stateless. Rosa was born in Moca, Dominican Republic. She is Dominican of Haitian descent. Rosa is a lawyer, a human rights defender, and an activist who worked to create a human rights network in 26 communities alongside the Human Mobility Pastoral. She holds a master's degree in human rights and international humanitarian law with specialized training in statelessness and research. Rosa is also a writer and poet and now proudly resides in Pittsburgh. Andres Franco was appointed executive director of City of Asylum in October of 2020, recognized globally for providing sanctuary and community for endangered literary writers. City of Asylum is now in its 16th impressive year. Mr. Franco's new role with City of Asylum allows him to refuse his commitment to creative free expression with his real life experience as a foreign-born artist in Pittsburgh. A native Medellin, Colombia, Andres Franco became a US citizen in 2015. And also joining us, the skillful and graceful Ms. Flavia Franco will serve as our interpreter for the evening, and we welcome her as well. I'm your host, Minette Seat, supervising producer here at WQED. There are so many questions around this wonderful documentary, and I do hope you all join us tonight, and it'll be airing at 10 p.m. as part of the POV series. I'm going to start off my first question with Rosa through Flavia Skills and ask, the title of the documentary is Stateless. Please define that term for our viewers and how it applies to the people we're going to be seeing in the film later.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches. Qué gusto estar aquí con ustedes. Gracias por hacer posible este espacio. Sí.
Good afternoon, good evening. What a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for making this space possible.
Apátridas. Una persona apátrida es aquella que no tiene un vínculo con un estado. Una persona que no puede demostrar su vínculo con ningún estado.
A stateless person is a person who doesn't have any link to any state. It's a person who cannot show any link to any state in particular.
Entonces, al no tener ese reconocimiento de la nacionalidad o ciudadanía de ese estado, es imposible que pueda acceder a muchos derechos.
Now, upon not having that recognition from the state, it's impossible for them to access to any of those rights of that state.
Por ejemplo, estudiar, acceder a salud, educación, seguridad social.
For example, studying, healthcare access, education, any type of social security.
Incluso el libre tránsito se ve limitado cuando este derecho es limitado.
Including things as like transportation will be limited once this right is limited.
Rosa, my question is, after 2013, the passing of the Dominican Republic revoking the official citizenship of the Haitian immigrants and Dominicans of Haitian descent, where has it physically left those people? I mean, without civil rights, without citizenship, how can they move or work or take care of their families?
Importante pregunta.
Great question.
Es importante señalar dos aspectos importantísimos, y es que una cosa es el migrante, la persona que viene de un país, en este caso de Haití a República Dominicana, que es el tema de los migrantes.
It's a great question. It's important to highlight two different things. One person is an immigrant person, one person who comes from Haiti and who migrates to the Dominican Republic.
Y el otro grupo son los hijos de esos migrantes que nacieron, perdón, los hijos de los migrantes que nacieron en República Dominicana.
The latter group, the other group, is the children of those immigrants, children born in the Dominican Republic.
Que son las personas que han sido afectadas con esa sentencia del 2013.
These are the people who had been affected with this sentencing in 2013.
Que fueron desnacionalizadas.
Their nationalities were removed.
Y otros se han quedado en situación de apatridia.
Others, some of them have been stayed in a situation of statelessness.
Entonces, en 2013, en búsqueda de que el más alto tribunal pudiera devolver los derechos que desde 2007 habían venido siendo restringidos.
Now, in 2013, we were looking for the highest court to get back those rights that were lost, that have been revoked since 2007.
Entonces, hace todo lo contrario, quitando la nacionalidad a todos los descendientes de extranjeros, pero en la práctica solo se aplicó a los hijos de haitianos.
So this law does everything against it. It's removing all of these rights, and this was applied to all of the children of these Haitian immigrants.
Y aquí yo quiero citar textualmente lo que decía esta sentencia, que todos los hijos de extranjeros en condición migratoria irregular desde 1929 al 2013 también son extranjeros.
Rosa, ¿cuál es el año?
1929.
And I want to cite exactly what the sentencing says, that all of the children and foreigners coming back to 1917.
1929. This
Gracias,
law was
Misha.
made retroactive to all the way to 1929 for the people, the children who were born in Dominican Republic of Haitian migrants.
Entonces esto como que ayuda para que la gente pueda entender por qué se está luchando, qué está pasando.
So that's why we are doing this, so that people can understand what is going on. Why are people fighting for this?
Sobre todo en un país donde para ser dominicano solo habían dos condiciones: nacer en suelo dominicano o ser hijo de un dominicano.
Even in a country like Dominican Republic, where the conditions to be a Dominican citizen was to be born on Dominican soil or be a son or a daughter of a Dominican person.
Entonces, las personas que quedaron apátridas les corresponde la nacionalidad porque nacieron en suelo dominicano bajo una constitución que les reconoce ese derecho.
Now, these people who are now stateless, they belong to like Dominican citizenship because they were born under these two conditions.
Pero lamentablemente por prejuicio y discriminación, un elemento histórico que ya lo verán en el documental, que venimos arrastrando por décadas, entonces se manifiesta y le quita la nacionalidad de forma arbitraria.
Now, we will see this in the documentary, unfortunately, that they will be revoked. They will lose their citizenship, and we will see this, and it has years and years of history.
What strikes me is the intent to not just to affect the citizens and the descendants who are there now, but to go back generations to the 1920s and to effectively try to destroy the lives of people that, you know, may have even passed on, but thought that they had the right to be in this country. It's just so clearly intentionally mean. I'm very sorry, Michelle.
Let me just to add to that, you know, the intentionality, why we know that what Rosa was saying is that these citizens are defending their birthright citizenship, just like here in the United States. The Constitution protects their right to citizenship. You're born on the soil, you have a right, and it's pretty much pretty much consistent across the Americas, this idea of birthright citizenship, not necessarily by blood, but if you're born on the land, it doesn't matter who your parents are, you are of the land. This is in the United States and in many of the Western Hemisphere countries who were colonized by settlers who wanted to recognize that birthright. The reason why we know this is an intentional is the date of 1929, and this is where the US comes in. 1929, Haiti was under US occupation and was also on the tail end of the occupation of the Dominican Republic, and was pushing the Dominican Republic to sort of enforce this border. And it's when the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic was sort of made official. And so it's a delineation of which there's sort of a hemispheric influence. And we see today, even with Haiti, that the US has been involved with that island for a very long time. And under the occupation, what people may not know, there have been US occupations across the Americas, right? In Central America and Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and other places in Latin America. And many of the military that were there were from the South. And they were coming with their Jim Crow sort of perceptions of race that sort of influenced and was integrated into people's perception and attitudes, certainly on the island as well.
So it's basically one of the worst American imports, racism and Jim Crow, and that 1929 date was no coincidence. It was meant to bring back those memories and enforce those kinds of strictures.
Yes. Now, just to say, it's not just an importation. It's reinforcing certainly a U.S. attitude, but a racial caste system has existed on the island since colonization, since Christopher Columbus arrived, right? And it's just taken on these different iterations. But with this 1929 border set, there were racial implications behind it.
It was particularly American in 1929.
Yeah.
Michelle, let me ask you, you wrote and directed Stateless, and I can tell from the passionate response you just gave, how did you decide to tell this particular story? What about it spoke to you directly?
Well, I'm originally from the island. I was born in Haiti. My father is Haitian, my mother's Panamanian. And I've always grown up sort of connected to both sides of the island, either through family that were married to Dominicans or some who lived in the DR, but also culturally. I was just thinking about this the other day. I mean, I grew up listening to Dominican music, and my parents, were very much part of there was a love-hate relationship with the culture, precisely because of the history. We talk about it a little bit in the film. There was a racial genocidal extermination that took place in 1937 that I had heard about growing up as well, where the dictator Trujillo intentionally sort of ordered the massacre of Dominicans of Haitian descent and Haitian migrants, as well as darker skinned Dominicans were also killed at the time. This is in 1937. And so for me, the stories that we tell at RADA Studio center around how does the systemic sort of impact the personal. And a lot of the work I've been doing has been around sort of racial justice issues in the United States from a personal lens and from a racial lens, but very specific to character and story and how we handle it, how do we resist, how do we react, and how do we navigate these systemic issues. So when the sentencia happened in 2013, I'd already been starting to do some collaborative work around the earthquake in Haiti on the Haitian side of the island, even looking at collaboration between Dominicans and Haitians around the earthquake, young folks trying to counter the stereotypes that exist and that are kind of shoved down their throats, and they're creating moments of bridging solidarity. And so when the sentencia came, I thought it was an opportunity for me to sort of return to the island, be more connected to my roots, but also this idea of citizenship and migration and race and how it plays out, has a very personal resonance as well as an immigrant here in the United States too, and experiencing sort of similar issues of discrimination. Here, I felt also that it was an opportunity, and also an opportunity to unpack the racial caste system that exists on that island, and the fact that I grew up in a community also where, you know, colorism and pigmentocracies are some part of family life and discussions. And how can I tell these stories, you know, through documentary, through film, so we can open it up and have a dialogue that's deeper, more intentional, as opposed to sort of pushing it away and thinking that, oh, this is only in the United States, only, you know, that, and really more looking at how we all interconnected. How does white supremacy play out for us on a hemispheric level? And so I went down and met Reconocido, the people who were working down there through the networks that I had built from the earthquake, and met Rosa Iris. Reconocido is an organization that fights and defends for the rights of Dominicans of Haitian descent, led by Dominicans of Haitian descent. And Rosa Iris was a part of that network.
You mentioned how your work focuses on how the systemic impacts the personal. And one of the things that struck me as all these things are going on, all these systems are fighting against the Haitian people, the Dominican people of Haitian descent, how you managed to capture this very personal story of this woman and her children and her getting them ready and feeding them her supper and campaigning to run for office and fighting and going through the bureaucracy to get people paperwork just seen and looked at and acknowledged. And I was marveled at how you brought home that very personal aspect of what it is that Rosa was doing. Did you, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, how many days did you spend with them? Did you just kind of move in and become a member of the family?
Well, not quite, almost, but well, not quite. I mean, this is a process that is over 5 years in the making. Maybe
wow.
More. For 2014, we had our first trip, our first research trip, 6 months after the sentencia. I met Rosa a little later, but you know, if you count that from then to our premiere, you know, this year in 2021, it's over 6 years in the making. So, you know, I often talk about the idea that the time we spent off the camera with the communities that we're working with, or how we engage with our collaborators, is more important even than when we turn the camera on. And so, you know, we spend a lot of time doing research, spending time with Rosa, spending time in the different sugarcane communities, building also a network of trust with the production that was based in the DR. The field producers who sort of led the production down there were sort of my eyes and ears when I was not there. And they played an integral part to building the trust and to almost sort of also understanding the vision, like this is, for me, this is a Haitian diasporic lens, but in conversation and dialogue with the Dominicans of Haitian descent and Dominican producers on what is going on the ground and what did they feel, you know, and what did Rosa Iris feel was important to portray. And that was the result of a collaborative conversation. It's also how we came to get to know Teofilo, who was another main participant in the film. This was Rosa Iris' sort of initiative to say, you know what, Teofilo is a prime example of the extent of the destruction of life that this bureaucracy imposes. And so it's through her that we met him. And that could only happen through a relationship of trust and a friendship, I would say.
That shared experience and that shared vision and that friendship is evident in the film. And I think it rings true in all the scenes that we see, especially with Rosa's cousin. Andreas, you are the executive director of City of Asylum, a local nonprofit that offers refuge and support to endangered writers. How did you connect with Rosa Iris?
So Rosa came to City of Asylum and was part of a reading in January of 2020. But I think her story really connects with the mission of City of Asylum at different levels. She has since participated in another project. It's called Marking This Moment in Time, which is a program by the Haitain Endowment that is allowing artists to tell the story of the pandemic and the protests we have been living, you know, anti-racist protests that we have been living, and telling that story from a Pittsburgh perspective. So she was one of the interviewees for that particular program. But her life story also connects to what we do at City of Asylum. So City of Asylum was created to offer a safe home for endangered writers. And what happened was that when we brought those writers here to Pittsburgh, the way they interacted with the community really changed the community itself. And because of that, we started presenting programs. So initially the writers would be reciting poetry, and neighbors would stop by and listen to them. So we know that art has a way to impact communities. And we now have the Exile Writer Program and also a very strong programming unit. We present more than 150 programs per year, and we focus on historically marginalized voices. We also focus on historically marginalized audiences. So all of our programs are free, so we really want to bring everyone to the table. I think when people communicate, when they share their experiences and tell their stories, you start understanding other people's perspectives, and you start understanding other people's better. And that's what we do. So Rosa was part of one of those readings, and she read 5 poems. And for us, it's very important to allow the artists to speak for themselves. So we use our platform to allow others to tell their stories. And she was part of one of those readings. And I think I have to tell you, Michelle, it is very apparent that there was this trust building with the community, because in the documentary you see this human connection and this sense of intimacy throughout the whole documentary. And you're dealing with very difficult subjects, and very painful. You can tell that people feel very passionately on both sides, because you actually give voice to those who are in favor of the ruling of 2013. And you can hear that, but then you can tell that you have that connection, and that is what makes art so important, because you really have a way of reaching people that you would not be able to by just having a conference or reading a paper. The way a documentary, a film, a poem, a piece of music impacts you is very direct, and you really start to understand as a human, as opposed to trying to go intellectually to understand the program. You start understanding it from your heart. So that is part of what we do at City of Asylum, is to provide a platform for artists. And then the second project I mentioned, the Marking This Moment in Time. Several of our writers in the Exile, current and former writers in the Exile program, wrote pieces and conducted interviews, and one of them was with Rosa, and she talks about her experience. I was really touched by the way it was described. She's twice a foreigner, because she was a foreigner in her own land, and now she has emigrated to the United States, and she's a foreigner here too, but also twice a minority, a marginalized ethnic community, being now of a Hispanic minority here in the US, but before then she was Afro-Hispanic in the Dominican Republic, and also marginalized because of her heritage. So again, it's very important to start understanding all of these issues from multiple sides, but also to understand the people behind those issues. And Rosa's poetry reading of January of 2020 really talks out many of these issues that we are discussing.
Andres, you did touch on something that I do want to go back to Michelle about, but before I do, I wanted to ask, what has your community response been like? Pittsburgh's immigrant community has been growing slowly but steadily over this past several years. And you talked about that shared experience and about reaching out in a way that transcends the intellectual discussion, but reaches at a heartfelt level. What has your audience been like, especially with the exiled writers in the past few years?
So I think the community has really embraced the exiled writers, and that's really what has kept City of Asylum going, and also what has shaped the organization into what it is today. I think by bringing exile voices and putting them in touch with the community, people start thinking about injustice in faraway lands. So, our first writer was from China. We have had writers from El Salvador, Venezuela, Iran, Burma/Myanmar, Ethiopia, and many other countries. And you start understanding injustice in different places. But you also start thinking about injustice in your own backyard. Like, is anyone in my community being subject to the same injustices? One of the questions that was asked of Wan Zhang, the first writer in exile here, by somebody who went to school, I think it was like an 8 or 9-year-old, was, what does it feel to be incarcerated? What does it feel to be in prison when you did not do anything wrong? And for a child to start asking those questions showed us that there's something really, really fundamentally important and special about bringing exile writers into the community. And those are the questions that we started asking ourselves, and that's why we have the Exile Writer Program, but we also have our public programs. All of them are free, that tackle many times issues of racial equity, social justice, and again, the marginalized voices, historically marginalized voices that we don't get to hear, and audiences that do not get to participate in arts and cultural events on a regular basis. So I think the community has really embraced this idea, and at the very beginning, the co-founders, Diane Samuels and Henry Rees, were asked, like, do you think there's really an audience in Pittsburgh to go listen to poetry in Chinese? You know, a lot of times we present poetry, most of the time I would say in language. Sometimes the translation comes later. Sometimes you may have some text that you can follow. But is there really an audience? And the answer is yes. We went from one program a year to 12 programs a year. From May 4th, 2020 to May 4th, 2021, we presented 200 programs virtually. I think by now we're in program number 250 or so. So there is an audience that wants to see this, and there is an audience here in the community that wants to hear these voices.
Yes, and wait till they can see you in person again. That'll be amazing for them. Michelle, just to go back just for 1 second, when we were talking about the making of the film and those relationships with your producers on the ground, with the people who kind of like scoped out the area for you and made these relationships real over that 6-year period that you were making this film. When you were interviewing the ladies from the nationalist organizations, they were so outspoken with you. They were speaking their truth. And as I was recoiling from the truth they were speaking, I was wondering how you got to that place of comfort with them when they were able to say those things to you and felt so true and kept reinforcing over and over again, you're not racist. How did you get to that level, with that comfort level, with that part of your job?
That's very interesting. It's interesting because with these women and with Gladys, I didn't have to do much. I think there are a couple of things going on. One is, the assumptions that they had about me when they saw me, right? As a light-skinned person, they never questioned what my background was. And someone coming from the United States and Canada, because we have funding from Canada as well, they were very adamant about getting their story out. And so that almost is what took priority. And there was kind of like this self-fulfilling sort of belief system that they wanted to get out. Like with Gladys, for example, I didn't have to ask many questions. I would ask 1 or 2 questions, and it would all sort of pour out with this real desire, not necessarily to convince me, but to tell their story and to tell their version of their story. And so what I allowed for was that openness to just listen, right? Not get into any arguments, not getting into discussion, to just open the space to listen. And so that required a lot of self-discipline. But what it also did is really let the I don't know what you call it, but it ran, her stories. And I just took the journey with her. I mean, she took me to places. You'll see in this version of the film, we don't necessarily see all the places she goes to, but she takes me to many, many different places to make her case. And the cases are pretty weak if you look at the facts, but it doesn't change her opinion, right? And I think that was what it came down to. That she was so adamant, they were so adamant about expressing their point of view because they are so convinced that it is right. It is almost like a religion, right? It's like when you speak to someone with a belief system, you may believe in something different, but you're not going to change their belief system. And they're going to be so fanatic that they will keep telling you what they believe until it changes, or will push for the change. And I think that's what scary, sort of predictable, but understanding it more as a belief system that's immutable, I think is a safer way for us to understand how to engage. And that even if we're talking about movement building with this film or beyond in terms of shifting and becoming more, humanitarian, I don't think energy spent on trying to change those opinions will work from us, at least from the intimacy of the time that I spent with these women and with Gladys in particular. It's really about mobilizing those who have opposite, who believe in different, we're in a battle of narratives, and it's really about mobilization and movement and sacrifice on that end.
Yeah. There's so many parallels between that and what's going on in this country. We could talk for another 45 minutes about that alone. Rosa, what Michelle was just saying about mobilization and movement and belief, you were able to take all of those things and use them to power your own struggles. You were in a place where you were being threatened, your children were being threatened, and yet you were able to find the strength and reserve to not only fight for the rights of the people who had no voice, but you also ran for office. Tell me a little about that journey, that solidifying of your core and your heart and the things that you believed in that allow you to put yourself out there like that.
Mucha gente a veces cree que esto es como que algo escrito, pero todo surgió de forma muy espontánea.
Many people think that this was like written down as preconceived, but actually it all happened in a very spontaneous way.
Esto es lo que vivíamos día tras día.
This was what we were living through day in and day out.
Cuando tú luchas por la justicia social, cuando tú estás convencido y amas lo que haces, tú buscas la manera de mantener la lucha.
When you are a social justice fighter, when you fight for social justice and you're convinced in what you're doing, you look for a way, shape or form to get done what you want to get done.
Y en 2008, 2009, una de las primeras cosas que entendí es la importancia de que las personas afectadas nos empoderemos.
Now, in 2008, 2009, one of the first things I understood is about the importance of those people who are affected to be empowered.
Y esto nos ayudó a formar este movimiento que al día de hoy ha podido resistir todo lo que hemos venido viviendo.
Now, this was what helped us to create this movement that up to this date, we have been able to resist everything that we have been living through.
Llegar a pensar en una posición en el Congreso es ver que los cambios que necesitamos no solo se tienen que dar desde abajo, tenemos que llegar a ocupar posiciones donde se toman decisiones.
Now, to be able to run for office is just to think that those issues, not only that affect us, they're at the bottom, they also make the decisions, the decision makers.
Entonces, para un dominicano de ascendencia haitiana, que culturalmente su vida es aislada en el batey.
Now, for a Dominican of Haitian descent, which usually their life is isolated, right, at the bateys.
Y aspirar a una posición política es como que ser muy osado.
Now, to aspire to be an official, elected official, it's a very wild dream.
Pero después de la avalancha de todo lo que habíamos vivido, privación de los derechos más fundamentales.
Now, after the avalanche of everything that we have lived through, after even our most fundamental rights being taken away,
había que ver y demostrar que tenemos ese derecho a ser elegidos, o sea, hasta dónde llegan mis derechos políticos.
We had to demonstrate that we have that right to be elected. In other words, how far can I make it with my own rights?
Y mandar un mensaje a esta generación que viene. Nosotros tenemos derecho. Nosotros podemos aportar a nuestro país. Nos convierten en una carga que no es una casualidad. Hay un objetivo detrás de esto, pero podemos aportar.
We have rights. We can contribute. They make us seem as if we're like this heavy burden, but we are able to contribute. We want to contribute.
Y bueno, diciendo esto, recuerdo cómo yo puedo ser abogada. Justamente alguien de esta ciudad, sin conocerme, a través de una organización cristiana, me apoyó económicamente para yo ser abogada.
Now, as I'm saying this, I'm reminded of how I am a lawyer, right? Even like, as I'm saying this, I'm reminded that a person of Christian descent has helped me and contributed financially and helped me out as far as me being a lawyer.
Entonces, desde 2008, yo tengo una conexión con Pittsburgh, que ahora, después que estoy aquí, como que, oh, wow, cómo han ido pasando las cosas, pero qué interesante.
Now, since 2008, I have this connection to Pittsburgh, right? Like how things have been going on, and it's been quite an interesting connection.
Pero, volviendo a la pregunta, necesitamos que la población afectada, que ha logrado volver a tener acceso a sus documentos, no se detenga y que trate de llegar.
Now, going back to your question, we need the affected communities to be able to get their documentation, and that we try to get to
a los lugares, a las posiciones donde se toman decisiones. Si queremos ser progresistas, si queremos avanzar en la línea de gente que pueda promover cambios, tenemos que promover a la gente que piensa en esos cambios y que se necesitan.
Now, so if we want to move forward, we need to get those people, those affected people, to be elected officials, right? If we want to promote change, and we need change, and we want to be progressive, we need to put those people in elected positions.
Finalmente, es a veces bien difícil, porque vivir bajo constantes amenazas, llamadas, intimidación al extremo de causar daños emocionales a tu hijo. Y
finally, it's quite challenging. It's really challenging to live through this, being constantly threatened, having threats to my children. It's an emotional token.
Y al final, no quiero adelantarme al documental, ustedes lo verán, pero es duro cuando tú le vives diciendo a la gente, tenemos que echar el pleito, tenemos que hacer la lucha aquí internamente.
No, I don't want to give out too much away from the documentary, but it's hard when you're always saying, like, we need to keep on fighting, we need to get everyone moving, mobilized.
Y de repente tú tienes que abandonar tu país porque tienes que proteger tu integridad física. Es duro, es como que chocarte con la pared.
Now, and then suddenly you need to abandon your country to protect your physical integrity. It's harsh. It's like running into a wall.
Entonces esa ha sido la parte más difícil. Más de 5 o 6 años bajo presión, amenaza, intimidación, y tú decir, solo es para intimidar. Pero cuando tú ves que ya la intimidación pasa a una posible materialización, entonces es como que tener que abandonarlo todo.
Now, so yeah, it's challenging. We've had more than 5-6 years being intimidating, right? But then after that point, after that 5-6 year mark, it became to actually being a possibility, those threats, then you need to mobilize.
I'm wondering, what kind of defense did you have? Did the government even pretend to offer you any sorts of protection? And also about being stateless. If you are stateless, are you even permitted to hold office or to vote? Isn't that part of the primary citizenship rights they would first try to deprive you of?
Yo tuve la suerte que no han tenido la mayoría de las personas dominicanas de ascendencia haitiana. Y es que
I was lucky enough, not like most of the people who are Dominican of Haitian descent, and it's the following.
Y es que no sufrí una privación del uso de mis documentos.
And what happened in my specific case was that I did not suffer from anything had to do with the usage of my documents. I was able to use the documents.
Y es lo que me hacía sentir el mayor compromiso de que nuestras voces se escucharan.
That's what allowed me to feel that very commitment for our voices to be heard.
Es muy duro tú ver de forma práctica cómo una persona después de terminar la secundaria no puede ingresar a la universidad.
It's quite challenging from a practical perspective. How can a person who finishes high school, how can they access university, for example?
Cómo una persona después de haber vivido toda su vida con un documento, de repente no puede seguir haciendo su vida. Juan Teófilo es un caso ejemplar.
How can a person, after living their whole lives with the documentation, they suddenly don't have the documentation? How can they carry on with their life, right? Now, Juan Teófilo, his case is it's an example case.
Y si yo tuviera que decirte, como mujer, es muy duro ver que en mi país, si la madre no tiene documento, sus hijos corren esa misma situación aunque el padre tenga documento.
Now, as a woman, I have to tell you, it's quite hard to see this, that as a woman, if her children, if the woman doesn't have documentation, but the father does, then the children will not get that documentation.
Y cómo esto se traduce, no tener un documento, a que si eres una mujer víctima de violencia física, tu caso no progresa en los tribunales.
Now, if you are a woman who has suffered from physical abuse, your case will not go forward in the courts.
Y el agresor sale otra vez como que no ha hecho nada.
Now, the person who created the hurt, he comes out as if he has not done any harm at all.
En una sociedad donde tenemos un alto porcentaje de hogares monoparentales, o sea, dirigidos por mujeres, no pueden demandar la manutención de sus hijos porque no tienen un documento.
In a house where we have a majority, many households that are single parent households led by women, they're not able to even request for child support because they don't even have their documentation.
Entonces, en lo práctico, no tener un documento es un sistema de esclavitud moderna donde tú no puedes trabajar, estudiar, tienes que vivir en ese apartheid que se ha creado porque es más fácil tener esa gente en esas condiciones para mano de obra barata y otras situaciones que se dan.
Now, not having documentation, it's a case of modern day slavery. You're living in an apartheid that by not having documentation, you're not able to study, to work, to do things.
Es toda una segregación racial basada en estigma y discriminación por el origen de nuestros padres y de nuestros abuelos.
It's racial discrimination based on origin of our parents and of our grandparents. It's racial and discrimination.
It's racism, it's patriarchy, it's colonialism, it's all the isms that could possibly deprive a human being of their rights to exist. And it's just, I just have to salute you for telling the story and for your bravery. And thank you for being in Pittsburgh now. We're running out of time quickly. And I know that there was a piece of writing that Rosa wanted to share with us. One of the poems that Andres had mentioned before. I am going to slowly give way so that she can do that, and Flavia will translate that poem for us. We hope to have it, we'll have it on our website later if you'd like to experience for yourself, but I'd like to give Rosa that platform to read that poetry before we take a few questions from the chat. Whenever you're ready, just let me know.
Gracias. Se titula Yo soy esa negra. Este poema nace en septiembre 2019, cuando llegué aquí a Pittsburgh. No tenía casi comunidad hispana con quien hablar, entonces ahí comienzo a desahogarme.
Thank you so much for giving me the space. The poem is titled, I Am That Black Woman. This poem was written in September 2019 when I came here to Pittsburgh. I didn't know anyone, so it was my way of getting my feelings out.
Yo soy esa negra. Nacida en cafetales, crecí en cañaverales en aquellas comunidades donde aún hay presencia de mis raíces ancestrales. Esa que es condenada al desprecio de cobardes, que solo les ha interesado explotarlos con coraje. Yo soy esa negra que el batey ha parido, con trabajo y sacrificio avanzando en el dolor, luchando junto a los míos. Esos miles que han llevado a un limbo, quitándoles la oportunidad de un nombre y apellido. Y lo peor es que la nacionalidad es un limbo indefinido y no por casualidad. Yo soy esa negra que siempre escucharás denunciando tus abusos. Aunque me quieras matar, siempre denunciaré el amargo que has causado al truncar nuestras vidas, arrancar nuestros sueños, nuestros derechos, nuestros sueños anhelados, estudiar, trabajar, aportar más al Estado. Pero has preferido violar los derechos más sagrados de una parte de la población por estigma y discriminación. Durante décadas has ignorado las leyes y el debido proceso contra los hijos de haitianos. Yo soy esa negra que has intentado silenciar, tocando lo más sagrado, que es el fruto de mi vientre. A ellos los defiendo con uñas y dientes, sin importar cuánto me cueste. Solo quiero recordarle, nada dura para siempre. Hoy somos más unidos y conscientes del derecho que tenemos constitucionalmente. No siga jugando a confundir a la gente, sembrando odio y dolor, distrayendo la atención de los verdaderos problemas que tiene la nación. El alto costo de la vida, endeudamiento sin compasión, el dólar por las nubes, la salud en intensivo, el desempleo cada vez peor, salarios de miserias, la desigualdad, la seguridad ciudadana ya no es percepción, los negocios de aposento que mantienen impunidad y corrupción, mientras unos implacables se hacen dueños de la administración. No hay régimen de consecuencia, eso llora ante Dios y los ojos de un pueblo que ya no aguanta esta situación. Condenan a los que denuncian, a los que informan o defienden los intereses del pueblo, acosan al que eleva su voz o al que no se somete a lo que diga el jefe. Me uno a aquellas voces disidentes que les duele este país y de verdad ama a su gente. Yo soy esa negra orgullosa del batey, cuya mayor riqueza es su gente trabajadora, que luchar es lo que sabe hacer. Seguiremos adelante, venciendo el mal con el bien. Gracias.
I'll go ahead and read it in English at this time. I am that Black woman. I am that Black woman born on coffee plantations. I grew up among cane fields in those communities where there is still a presence of my ancestral roots. The one who is condemned to the contempt of cowards who have only been interested in exploiting them with courage. I am that Black woman that the batey has given birth to, with work and sacrifice, advancing in pain, fighting alongside my family, those thousands who today have led them to being in limbo, taking away the opportunity of a first and last name. And the worst is that their nationality is in an indefinite limbo and not by chance. I am that Black woman that you will always hear denouncing your abuses, even if you want to kill me. I will always denounce the bitterness you have done by truncating our lives, taking away our rights, our longed dreams, studying, working, contributing more to the state. But you have preferred to violate the most sacred rights of a part of the population due to stigma and discrimination. For decades, you have ignored the laws and due process against the children of Haitians. I am that Black woman who you have tried to silence by touching the most sacred thing that is the fruit of my womb. I defend them tooth and nail, no matter how much it costs me. I just want to remind you that nothing lasts forever. Today, we are more united and aware of the right that we have constitutionally. Do not continue playing to confuse people, sowing hatred and pain, distracting attention from the real problems that the nation has, the high cost of living, indebtedness without compassion, the dollar through the roof, intensive healthcare, unemployment every time worsening, salaries that are miserable. Citizen insecurity is no longer a perception. The business rooms that maintain impunity and corruption, while some implacable owners of the administration, there is no regime of consequences that cries before God and the eyes of a people that can no longer bear this situation. They condemn those who denounce, inform, or defend the interests of the people. They harass those who raise their voice or do not submit to what the boss says. I join those dissident voices that this country hurts and really love its people. I am that proud woman from the batey, whose greatest wealth is its goods. Hard-working people who fight is what they know how to do. We will continue going forward, overcoming evil with good.
Thank you, Rosa and Flavia, for sharing that with us. We are very proud to know this Black woman and to share this space with you this evening. We have a wonderful comment and a question, and I would like to read it, and it's pointed at all three of our panelists. First, it's from Akila, and excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Rosa, you're so inspiring, and hope you and your family are safe and well. Thanks to you and Michelle for sharing this powerful story. Akila asks, how do we continue to care and defend our communities, our families, our human rights, when also caring for ourselves? A very important question. Michelle, I'll go to you first. How do we do all of these monumental, very vital things and yet still give ourselves the care that we need for the battle?
Well, I guess for me, they're sort of one and the same, in the sense that I think it's through community that we feel replenished, you know? And I think that's part of what's inspiring, I feel, about Rosa's story, but also about stories that go against, you know, what we would call, you know, victimhood stories, right? And so for me, just being in community with Rosa, being in community with the producers who are in the DR with whom I am still friends, and we share. So you know, film and the stories that we're building and constructing are excerpts of a long relationship, right? And they are dependent on conventions of storytelling where we bring in an audience, you know, to feel at different levels. That is what art does, as Andres was saying. But behind all that is, for me, community. When I see Rosa, when I communicate with her on WhatsApp, when you know, we share on our social media, when we see each other break bread together, that for me is healing. So I think I get the self-care, and I know it's important, but for me, self-care is community and being able to know that we have downtime together and that we can be in community. We just came from Miami. We had a wonderful time. We were very fiery in our in our conversations and in our reactions and in the sort of the militancy of the moment and the point that we had to make. But we were also having fun and dancing and being together in communion. And I think that's life, right? So it's being able to balance those two. You know, for me, that's what replenishes me.
Rosa, I will ask you the same question. How do you care for, defend your community, and yet care for yourselves and for your family?
Bueno, es que ahí lo ha dicho Michelle, el secreto está en el trabajo en equipo, el vivir en comunidad.
Now, I think Michelle said it very eloquently. The secret is in teamwork, living in community.
Porque yo, ¿qué te digo? Tal vez nunca pensé en qué tengo que hacer para protegerme. Sin embargo, entendía que trabajando juntos, mientras yo hago lo que me toca, tú estás de este lado, aunamos esfuerzos y nos protegemos unos a otros.
Because to be honest, like I never really thought, what do I do to protect myself? However, when we're working in community, I think, what do we need to do to protect each other?
Y ahí está el resultado. No es fácil. Yo con el paso del tiempo a veces digo, ¿en qué yo estaba pensando? Expuse mucho, por ejemplo, a mi hijo, que siempre estaba conmigo para todos lados. Pero
now, it's not easy. I think as time goes by, I keep thinking, what was I thinking about? For example, I exposed too much my child. So like, what was I thinking? But
ahí también estaba la gente que estaba a nuestro alrededor. Y yo creo que esto ayuda mucho cuando cada uno desde nuestra posición, desde lo que sabemos, desde lo que hacemos, vamos contribuyendo, vamos haciendo esa comunidad donde nos vamos protegiendo unos a otros.
So that's where people had a place, had a role. Like those people, those of us who know what we're doing, we have different roles, we are learning and we're doing, and we're also protecting each other.
And Andres, I will let you bring it home. Tell me again, when you are doing this good work, when you're caring for and defending communities and people who need a voice, how do you find this time to care not only for yourself, but to get the strength to keep moving that vision and that voice forward?
Yeah, I will echo what Michelle and Rosa Iris have mentioned. I also, earlier in the pandemic in 2020, I read this wonderful quote by a composer, Arvo Pärt. He said that the pandemic has made us realize in a painful way that humanity is one organism, and that what happens in one part of the world will affect us all. And the pandemic showed us that in real time, because we know that at some level, but we don't really experience it. You know there's injustice somewhere and you think it's really far away, but that injustice is affecting you in ways that you don't realize. The pandemic showed us how quickly anything that is happening anywhere in the world is going to affect us, and continues to show us. Even here where we have very high vaccination rates, we know that there are variants circulating in places that they don't have access to vaccines. And those variants will eventually make it here and remind us that we are all interconnected. So I think we think about the other, helping the other, and we think about this community work. But we are, by helping other people, we are helping ourselves, and we are getting a lot back from doing that work, as painful, as hard, as difficult as it can be. Is work that is really advancing humanity, and we are part of that larger humanity. So you have to look at it from that standpoint, and that's where you find the strength to keep going. Something else that I have to say is that art always keeps you going, and art allows you to deal with these very difficult questions, these very difficult situations. But artists always find joy even when they are dealing with things that are intractable, things that have been really painful for throughout the history of humankind. Art allows you to convene around those issues, to heal, and to be able to bring them in a way that you feel better after having experienced it. So there's this cathartic moment. I think Rosa Iris' story is a very clear case of that. When you read her poetry, and I have read many of her poems now and seen them online as well as she read them, you realize this person has been through so much, and she still finds this urge to create, to share, to continue building community. The same with Michelle's movie. I think when you watch it, there are these moments of intimacy throughout the movie that make you feel connected. And I think by feeling connected to each other is how we gain strength. So that would be my answer to the question.
It's almost as if you all have woven a wonderful cloak that you've wrapped around all three of you that keeps you moving forward and keeps you warm and gives you strength. It's very inspiring, and I'm so proud to have met you. Please, we're just at the 8 o'clock mark, and we may go a little bit over. I just want to tell everyone who joined us tonight to please stay tuned for the documentary tonight. It is a beautiful, wonderful story. And it's not just wonderful to look at. It touches your heart in a million different ways. And there's lots more questions that I have, but I will stop right now and say thank you, Andres. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Rosa. And thank you so much, Flavia, for this wonderful evening, for sharing your stories and your gifts, and being a part of what we do here. It's why I got this job. So thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. We all do. Thank you so much for being in Pittsburgh.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.